Welcome to the Greater Culture Podcast, where we have conversations about how to elevate the quality of life through movement, nutrition, recovery, and mindset practices. Welcome to another episode of the Greater Culture Podcast with your host, Brad Marshall. And today, excited to be joined by someone just having recently met, Gab Bolin, who is a nutrition coach and has been helping out our space and our gym learn how to help people with their nutrition and their just overall health and fitness. So I'm really excited to dive into a conversation to get to know a little bit more about her background and how she got into things. So Gab, thanks for spending some time with me on the podcast today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to have this opportunity to chat with you and kind of, talk about things outside of just purely nutrition coaching.
It is fun when you get to know somebody like, oh, we share similar likes and we share similar passions, and you just dive into all that content, but you're like, how did they end up getting to where they're at? And I don't even know what their story looks like. So I know a few details about you and how you've come to be a nutrition coach, but love for you to share with folks, what did that journey look like for you to find health and fitness and then eventually find a passion for helping people with their nutrition?
Yeah. I came into health and fitness, I think, in a somewhat unique, but also kind of universal way. I actually, from the time I was, oh my gosh, maybe like 11 or 12, I was actually a professional actor. So as you know, I live in New York City. I've been here my whole life. So I grew up doing theater. I grew up doing television and commercial work and kind of, went to college and got my degree in acting. And at some point, I was fortunate enough that I was able to land a role on a television show. And I worked on this show for a few years. It was nothing, it sounds way more exciting than it really was. But I was working on television and I had a very unique experience where I was the body double for a very famous actress. And so I was in college at the time. And essentially, what the job entailed was they would give me the script for the day. And I would have to learn all of the lines and act with the other actors, but I was only ever shot from the back because there was like a lot of wardrobe changes and just like a lot of chaos that happened on the show. So the principal actors would change their clothes and get their hair redone and whatnot, and I would step in and do the scene with the other people. So it paid very well. It was great experience and great exposure. But the issue was whenever that actress lost a couple of pounds, I also had to lose a couple of pounds. And so it became a lot of pressure because this particular actress, who was lovely and we had a great relationship, and I think she's amazing, she was a child star who was kind of trying to come back into fame as a young adult. And so I think there was a lot of pressure for her to lose weight and look really good and, whatever. So she would lose weight and I had to lose weight. And it became a situation where I stopped really caring about acting or auditioning for other things. I wasn't really putting my best foot forward when it came to auditioning. I was truly just obsessed with how much I weighed. And of course, that spiraled into an eating disorder, which is not uncommon for young women. And one day I just woke up and I was like, I'm not happy. I'm not having fun. Like, I don't love this anymore. I'm not doing a good job. I'm not working on my lines. I'm not rehearsing. I'm not showing up to auditions like with my best foot forward. I'm just hungry and miserable. So I decided to take a break from performing. And during that time, I was working in restaurants, as most actors in New York City do, right? And I started to go to the gym just to see, like, maybe it would be fun to work out and not be on the treadmill for 3 hours, punishing myself for eating dinner last night. And so while I was working in restaurants, I started to work my way up the ladder, and I went from just a server to a trainer who would train the other servers, to someone who was training management, to someone who was, running the training program for an entire restaurant corporation. And so I was really good at teaching people how to do things while simultaneously kind of developing a love for fitness. And so one day I thought to myself, I should become a personal trainer. I'm good at teaching people how to do things and I really like working out. So I got my personal training certification and off I went. And so I started as a trainer. And of course, when you get certified as a trainer, you have no idea what you're doing. And so I feel badly for my early clients because of course you read the book and you go in and you're like, well, I guess let's give this thing a go. But I worked really hard at my craft and I became much better at it. and I found a lot of success. I found group fitness, which was very much a, performance style, foundational, sort of tied my love of acting with my love of fitness. And stayed there for a while. I did a lot of on camera stuff for a certain treadmill studio and did a lot of stuff like that. And eventually I just really got into CrossFit and the, sort of hardcore style. Like, I really wanted to get into things that were challenging and intense and be around people that wanted to be challenged and who wanted that intensity. And I think the one thing that I always came back to was the relationship with food, because I would have clients, I would have class participants who were not seeing the results that they wanted. And it was so clear to me that they struggled with their relationship with food, or they were not understanding what they needed to do, or how to feel better, or what, whatever the case may be. And so that's kind of how I decided to go into nutrition coaching, because I felt so much empathy for people who struggled with food. And I knew that, you can work out all day, and if you're not eating the right stuff or fueling your body, it's, what's the point? And so I've really made it a point to devote myself and my career to helping people fix that relationship with food, and, kind of make peace with food and what it is and what it does, and use it to get what they want, which is a physique that they're proud
I'm just coming right out of the gate with, oh, by the way, I was an actress way back when.
of.
And the thing I love about that is people's sort of origin stories really lend itself to where they find themselves today. And most folks we talk to, it's like, hey, I either ate or I worked out because there was a specific performance I was trying to get good at, if it was a sport or something like that. You ate and worked out for a specific performance, but yours was more aesthetic. And so I'm
Yeah.
curious, what was the mindset, or what sort of ways did you attach eating and working out in those early days when you were an actress and there was a certain standard to hit from an aesthetic perspective? It sounds like that relationship formed, and maybe it wasn't the healthiest at the time, but that's just kind of the way the business was, is what it sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I love to run. I've always loved to run. I've run 12 marathons. So I would wake up in the morning and I would go on the treadmill for as long as I possibly could. And I remember being in college and watching like Live with Regis and Kelly and, Oprah and all of those morning shows or whatever, and just what hours and hours and hours, until I had burned a certain amount of calories, or I was satisfied with the calories that I had burned. And of course, it's funny, right? Because now, as a professional, you look and you're like, what a waste of time, right? Like, what an arbitrary number to be utilizing. But at the time, it felt like the thing that was going to make me, achieve this goal that I wanted. And it was a really backwards way of looking at it, but it really did feel like it was the only way. And so it made me feel like fitness was a punishment, like it wasn't. And it took me a very long time to rebuild my relationship with fitness as well, and go on to run marathons and ultra marathons, and use it as a way to feel good about myself, instead of feeling like I had done something terrible I needed to repent for.
Yeah, and I think at that age too, education is not as readily available as maybe we'd love for it to have been. Like, there's so many things we learn in school growing up, but nobody really teaches you of like, here's generally how to eat, and here's how it relates
Yeah.
to working out, and here's how it relates to how you might look or feel. We just kind of go based on what we see in magazines. And was that kind of what you noticed as well? Because I imagine, you're working with the studio or whatever, and they say, hey, you got to look like this person, and in your head you think I got to lose weight, and without right education or somebody telling you what to do, you're just like, well, I guess I got to go run on a treadmill for as long as I can to hopefully lose some weight, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, yeah. And they don't care, right? They're like, listen, how you do it is between you and your God. Like, do whatever you need to do, but like, you got to do it. And I was going to a performing arts school where, the dancers had to step on the scale every Monday. Like, there was no, and my gut instinct is to say there was no empathy, but on the one hand, I do understand that certain careers have certain requirements. So just like if you want to be a firefighter, you have to be physically capable of wearing the gear that is very heavy and going up the stairs or carrying the axe or whatever, and you can't be a firefighter if you're not capable of doing that. So it would be so hypocritical for me to say, there was no empathy, they didn't feel sorry for it. That was the job. Look like this person. The problem really was that I didn't understand how to do that. And it felt like if I don't do this, I'll never work again. When in reality, I was great at what I did, and I was so young, and this was such good experience that like the worst thing that could have happened was I would have lost that job and found a new one, right? But it felt like it was dire all the time. And I think there is a lack of education, and it's funny too, because I started to get more serious about running, even though I had been running so many miles all the time. And I learned that I wasn't running correctly. Like there's a way to run, and they don't teach you that. You never learn that. Just like there's a way to eat enough protein, but they don't teach you that, right? You just never learn those things. And so you're just going in blind, and doing what you think is going to work.
Yeah, and I think once you start to learn and sort of get educated on like, oh, here's how to do these things, whether it's move properly, eat properly, sleep, whatever it is, it unlocks some new windows and new doors for you that you're like, oh, like I can do this a lot more efficiently than maybe I could on my own. And so I can imagine that identity you had of, hey, I got to look this way and I have to work out or do something to make that identity connect was really hard, I imagine, to start to break out of that. You mentioned it took a long time to sort of rebuild that relationship, like with health and fitness. And so, what was that process like? Because I think anytime we have to shed an identity or maybe change the way we think about something or our beliefs, that's a lot of work that goes into that. So, what was that process like of starting to say, you know what, running for the sake of doing marathons and for my own general health and fitness is where I'd like to go versus running as a way to help my aesthetic get me the job that I'd like?
Yeah. It's funny. I honestly don't remember a lot of it. And I think there's a trauma response somewhere in there, right? But I do remember feeling like there was no date that I needed to be ready for. So I didn't have to feel like, okay, by next Thursday, I have to weigh X. It was like, I'm going to come in and kind of explore and see what's going on. And, I was just like any other new person to a gym where I went into like we had a Blink Fitness nearby where I lived. And I went in and I was like, all right, well, I know how to use the treadmill. So let me start there. And then I know that you're supposed to go like this with the dumbbells, right? So let me do some of those. And, I started using some online resources and kind of talking to people and figuring it out. And I'd see someone across the gym do something and then I'd try it. And it just felt like fun, and there was no pressure. And it made me really enjoy the process, where all of a sudden one day I was like, this weight used to feel heavy and now it feels light. This is great. And that sort of relationship with giving myself grace and freedom to kind of just have fun for an hour, was really freeing. And I think that's what made me love it, was that it felt kind of like being a little kid on the playground.
Yeah, it makes me think about this quote that's really been hanging out in my head where it's like the person who loves walking, loves the journey, ends up going so much further than the person who loves the destination. When you remove
Totally.
the, hey, I have to do this by this time and just say, let me have fun and explore and be curious of what is this like to engage in fitness and movement and working out. You're like, oh, there's so much here that I can do and have fun with. And then you just fall in love with that of like, this is just the process, this is just part of my daily routine. And that helps you go so much further than like being super specific about that end destination, is what it sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think so much of what I was doing was so like it felt like it needed to be hardcore. I needed to put it up to a crazy incline and run as hard as I could. And, to go in and use some free weights, it was like, oh, my heart doesn't feel like it's going to explode. This is kind of nice, right? It's a different type of fitness. And I just really felt like I had some free time, right? Because I wasn't working anymore. And I didn't have a lot of pressure. So let's see what happens.
Yeah, it's amazing how the pressure that we feel most of the time is self-imposed. We think we
Oh, yeah.
need to look a certain way, be a certain way, hit a certain level of fitness. So that self-imposed pressure builds and it makes things either more challenging or more difficult. You mentioned then you transitioned out of acting and went into the restaurant industry, and that seems like such a totally different landscape. Whereas like with acting, there's a certain aesthetic and a certain performance on camera, and now you move into an industry where the focus is the food and the experience and the way you can create a memorable moment for somebody. And I know from talking to folks in that industry, it's not always the healthiest industry to be in
Oh
either,
yeah.
based on the timelines that they work and things like that. So, what was that process like, transitioning and moving into that industry that has maybe a very different mentality around not even worrying about or caring about fitness or aesthetic at all?
Yeah. You know, it's funny. My dad is a chef, so I've very much been in that industry, like by proxy, my whole life. And I had always waited tables kind of like, the summer between high school and college, and when I was in college, in between jobs, right? Because typically you don't get a reoccurring spot on a television show. You work for 2 or 3 days and then you're unemployed again. So I kind of always shifted into and out of restaurant jobs. It was not like a first time experience. But I was really good at it. And for whatever reason, right? I'm very good at multitasking, I guess, and comfortable talking to people and whatever. But I think the thing that was really interesting was that after I stopped working, and I had only decided I was going to just take a break. It wasn't a permanent thing, but I had a bad experience where I went in for a very, very well-known casting director who really liked me to read for a role that I was great for. And of course, I stayed up all night the night before because I was so worried about whether or not I was thin enough and what I was going to wear and if he was going to think I was fat. And I didn't really rehearse it at all. And I didn't have the script memorized and I just bombed it. And he was like, what is going on? Like, what happened? And I was so embarrassed that I was like, I need to not try to, fix this immediately. I need to just step away. And that was many years ago. But originally it had just been a short, break that I was taking. And so because I had no pressure, because I was just working a serving job and I had friends in the restaurant and it was very, I was going to school, but my schedule had been made so that it could work around the television show. So it wasn't very demanding. I started drinking a lot. We drank all the time, and that is so prevalent in the restaurant industry. We would work from, 4 p.m. to 10 p.m. and then go to the bar across the street and stay there till 4 in the morning and then come straight back to the restaurant after grabbing a sandwich and open and do breakfast. And it was a lot of fun. It was a great time. But it was definitely like sort of the pendulum swinging in the other direction, where part of me was like, I want to go to the gym and be healthy and like lift weights. And the other part of me was like, well, I have no responsibilities. So let's just get hammered and have fun. And it took a while for the pendulum to kind of settle in the middle. And for me to really sort of say, like, I don't like the way that I feel when I engage in this activity, and it's not bringing me closer to where I want to be. It's really bringing me further away. And so there was definitely a period where the pendulum had swung way too far in the other direction, which is, I would assume, not uncommon.
Yeah, and I think that speaks a lot to the environment you find yourself in, which is why I think so many times people, when they're trying to make a shift, they have to find a group of people who are either like-minded or on the same journey. Because if you are trying to live a life one way and everybody in your circle is not in alignment with that or doesn't support that,
Yep.
it makes it so much harder to be the one who's like, I'm going to pass on drinking tonight, or I'm going to eat this way. And everybody's like, what's wrong with you? Like, what's your deal?
Yeah.
And it really makes you come to some of those realizations of like how important are either the goals or what I'd like to look like or what I want to feel like as it relates to the environment you find yourself in. And, like I think all these different groups have these stereotypes, but it's also because that's just the way life is. And I imagine you probably had some of that too, where you said all of a sudden, like the pendulum swung and now it's coming back to center. And what was that process like of figuring out that, oh, maybe I should be more in the center versus, it is fun, it's enjoyable, but it's not necessarily the way I like to feel or how I want to be.
Yeah. It's funny because I think the pendulum swung for many, many, many years. And when I was like 28 or 29, I decided I'm done drinking. I don't want to drink anymore. And I didn't have a problem with alcohol. I wasn't like, I didn't have any kind of addiction issue. I felt a little bit like if I wanted to have fun and enjoy the company of the people I surrounded myself with, I had to. And I'm talking like at this point in my life, I have left the restaurant industry. I've been a trainer for like 6, 7 years now, maybe even more than that. And I just felt like first of all, I don't want to feel this way. I am also a professional who is trying to tell other people not to do this. So why am I doing it? But additionally, I don't want to surround myself with people that I feel like I need to be in an altered state to enjoy or to fit in with. So immediately it was like, this is not working. This is not working. And I need to make the change that I deserve to make so that I feel like I'm being true to myself. And so we've jumped a little bit timeline wise, but I did at some point just decide like, this is not going to work for me anymore. And so I think it's really interesting when I talk to clients who are kind of on the fence and struggling with the same things, where it's obviously an issue for their goals or for, their health. And they're like, oh, but it's so hard to be the person who doesn't do it. And it's like, yeah, but you can be.
Absolutely. And one thing I'm always interested in is, was there a specific moment, like that inflection point, where it was like, this was the realization, I remember where I was, what was going on? Or was it more of just this general burn that started to build till you were like, yeah, it's just not working for me anymore? Because I always think it's interesting how people sometimes have a very vivid, strong memory of like, this is when I decided. And then others are like, it was just building for a while and I just decided I had enough.
I definitely had two experiences, and I think the first one wasn't enough to do it, which is such a shame. The first time I went to a work function, a very long time ago, where there was a lot of alcohol and a lot of like, Gab's no fun. Come on, Gab, drink with us. And I got way, 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 way carried away and really sick and kind of ruined it for everyone. And that was that. And then my boss was like very unhappy with me, even though I was like, you served all of this alcohol. Like, not that I'm not taking full responsibility for what I did, but it was like a little, the lines were kind of blurry. Um, and that wasn't enough to do it. But that was the time when I was like, I never want to be in that position again, where I'm apologizing for things that I don't even feel like I did, right? Like, I don't remember being the person that did that. And I just got sick and ruined the party. But, after that, I remember being out with friends who had come into town to visit and ordering a drink and thinking to myself, I have a training session tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. And I care so much more about that training session than I do about chit chatting with these people who in 3 days are going to leave. Like, I like them and whatever, and this is great, and they're my friends, but I'm not going to sacrifice my training, which is very important to me, for a hangout with them. So I was like, I'm not drinking this drink, and I'm not drinking anymore. And that was it. And I woke up the next morning and I went to my training session. I felt great.
Amazing how there's those experiences we have that push us or drive us into a direction that maybe we were already thinking or wanting to make the change. And sometimes it requires that push. So whether it's, a specific experience like you had or a person or whatever it is. And it's almost like there's this decision point where it's like, what do I care more about? How I appear and how I look, or the group, or do I care more about the person I want to be and what I'm striving towards? And that is such a hard decision for people to make, because it's almost like you have to leave the tribe or leave the nest and be a little bit isolated, be a little bit vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine you experience that a lot with the clients you work with, of they're in a social setting, they're in an environment that maybe is not conducive to the lifestyle they want to live. How do you go about helping people through that experience, having lived it yourself?
I think the first and most important thing is compassion, because it's very easy to be years removed and be like, it's easy, just do it. It's not that, like, you're going to be fine. So I often remember like the first few times that I went out with friends and said, oh no, I'm not drinking. I have a funny story about going to a bachelorette party and being at this bar and not wanting to kind of tell people that I wasn't drinking because of the pressure I would feel kind of getting that backlash. So instead, I went up to the bartender and I said, "Hey, so I'm here at my friend's bachelorette party, but I'm pregnant and they don't know, and I don't want to make it about me. So when I order a drink, will you just give me, like, if I order a rum and Coke, will you just give me a Diet Coke and make it look?" She was like, "Yes, oh my God, of course." And obviously it wasn't true. I just didn't want to deal with it. And I was crafty like that for a little while until I was finally just like, I don't need to be ashamed of this. And I definitely don't need to, deal with people's like, well, why not? It's fun. Like, it's none of your business. Why not? I just don't, and I'm not interested. And so I think having those conversations with people where it's like, listen, I don't need you to be perfect today. I don't need you to go on the internet and give some big speech as to why you are no longer drinking. I just want you to go to this party. And if you don't want to have a drink, don't have a drink. Get a seltzer, have them put lime in it. It will look like a drink. All you really want is something to hold in your hand so you don't feel weird. And if they come back and they tell me I had one glass of wine, it's like, all right, well, cool. You didn't have five, right? Like, good job. And I think it's just about baby steps. And you know, another thing that I'm a huge believer in is exposure therapy. Because once you feel how good it is to wake up on a Sunday morning and be able to go to your CrossFit class or go on your run and not feel like garbage, you kind of don't want to ever go back, right? So the exposure to the good stuff is really helpful when it comes to saying no to the bad stuff. So as long as they're getting that feeling, and occasionally people go backwards and they go out and they have a couple drinks and they're like, I feel terrible, I never want to do that again. And then it's like, now you know.
The other thing that I always find too is when somebody's eating a certain way for a certain amount of time, and all of a sudden they go back and have, an off blueprint meal, and all of a sudden not even drinking, just eating a certain way.
Yep.
They wake up the next day like feeling hungover, and they're like, "What just happened?" And I'm like, your body's kind of gotten used to eating a certain way, and you went back, and now your body's like, what was that? And it's wild because there's times where you just live like that and you
Yeah.
don't even know the difference or what it could feel like. And I think that's something I've seen a lot of is people don't even know what it would feel like or what it can feel like to have a certain level of fitness or strength or feel good about themselves, just because they haven't had the opportunity to experience that before. Woohoo, we're back. So I was just saying that I think it's interesting that people don't even realize how good they can feel. And it's hard for them to imagine wanting to make these decisions of eating a certain way and sticking to a plan because they're not exactly sure what it can feel like on the other side of it. And you kind of have to try and build some of that trust with them and confidence that, hey, if you continue on and you just make these small changes and you just do it consistently enough, we're going to get you to that spot that you can imagine or that you want to feel like. But it takes time and it takes discipline, and it also takes, for a lot of folks, like we mentioned, shedding some of those identities or some of those ways they've lived for so long, which is just a really, really challenging process.
Yeah. Nutrition is emotional. Food is emotional. Whether you're avoiding something or eating something or not eating something, drinking alcohol, it's all familial. It's all, habits or relationships, all of those things. And so making those changes is really hard because it's not just about you used to eat X, now I want you to eat Y. It's a lot. And I think what we really need to do is go back to the root of where it's coming from, right? Are you feeling that you really need to drink because you feel like your friends wouldn't like you if you didn't, right? Do you feel like you need to order dinner at this restaurant with your friends because if you don't go, they're going to talk about you behind your back? Like, what is the root? Because more often than not, it's food is sometimes a coping mechanism, but sometimes it just feels like, well, this is what I've always done, so this is what I have to do. And, I'm sure I'm not alone in saying this, but like, if you do what you've always done, you're going to be or look like or feel the way you've always been, looked like, or felt. And, nobody is interested in, no one hires a coach so they can stay the same.
A book I read not too long ago that I've loved, and it's the name of it is The First Rule of Mastery, and it's all about this concept of FOPO, fear of other people's opinions, and how that limits us so much in what we're able to achieve and go after because we are so concerned about other people's opinions and just the relationships we have with ourselves, with others, with food, all of that. And so there was a point in time in your life where you were like, you know what? There is a lot to be said here for nutrition and coaching and working with folks outside of just movement and fitness. And I think that's where you start to dive into these relationships and have conversations and help people move forward. So at what point along the journey, while you were a trainer and working with folks, did you say, you know what, there's more to it than just moving and working out? And I'd love to explore some of those maybe deeper relationships and conversations that I know can make a bigger impact on people's lives.
I'm laughing because I feel like this is where things kind of take a 180. Um, I'm a pretty tough cookie. Like I have a lot of empathy because I have been through struggles on my own, but I also know what it takes to overcome those things. And I know that if you want to, you will. So when it came to training, I felt like I was really frustrated with working so much to try to help people and feeling like I was really only impacting like an hour of their day. And not to say that they weren't working hard enough, not to say that they weren't doing all the right stuff, but it was just such a small window. And I felt like I was just like people were just spinning their wheels in all sorts of walks, right? Like whether you have a personal training client that only can do once a week, or you have somebody who comes to class inconsistently. It was just very hard to really help people with bigger picture, full time stuff. And I wanted to figure out a way to help them in a way that would make way more sense. And it felt like people are going to go to class. People are going to find a way to work out. People are going to get a little sweaty. But what are they doing before and after? And if I can help them with that, because I knew that was the thing that was potentially holding them back, right? So I just kind of took a leap of faith and said, I think this is what I want to do. I think that I've really become a good communicator. And I think that I have learned how to teach people how to move, but I'd like to kind of challenge myself to see if I can help them make those bigger changes. And so I wanted to do it in a way where it was more, I don't want to say invasive, but it was more like it's not just an hour anymore. Like it's the 23 other hours, right? And hold people accountable and help them to understand like there are no excuses. You have to do this if you want the results that you claim you want. And so it felt like a little bit of a personal challenge and also a way to actually make a bigger impact.
Yeah, I think the moment you realize that it's more than just the way you move, it's more than just the way you eat, it's more than just the way you sleep or recover. It's all of it simultaneously at the same time all the time. It almost feels overwhelming where it's like, man, how do I get all of these things dialed in? And now with the rise of social media and content, you can hear from every influencer and every expert all the ways you need to be enhancing and optimizing those different areas. And all of a sudden you're just like,
Mm.
it's too much. Like I can't do
Yeah.
all of that and still function as a parent or as a significant other, whatever it is. And as a, somebody who helps in the field, it's like, how do we simplify it? We're like, yes, they are important. Yes, we can get you moving in the right direction. And let's do it in a way that doesn't feel overwhelming. And so when you started to have some of those conversations, because I think that's the interesting transition of, hey, I'm your trainer. We work out for an hour a day. Now I want to start having conversations with you about what you're eating, what your sleep looks like, what your routines are like outside of just working out. And for some, that can be uncomfortable. And for others, it feels more natural. And you mentioned being a communicator, having good relationships. What was that process like of then trying to work your way in of, hey, let's have some more meaningful, bigger conversations around just your overall health and wellness and figure out ways that we can tweak and help you out there?
Yeah, I was fortunate that a lot of my clients that immediately said yes to work with me, I had a good relationship with. So it wasn't like starting from the ground up. But as I got a little bit more established in the field, it did start to become a hi, nice to meet you. Tell me everything about your life. And I think people's natural, impulse is to apologize for their behavior and also protect themselves from embarrassment, which I see a lot. People don't want to tell me because they're afraid I'm going to judge them. And so what I found is you have to level with people and you have to be honest with them and about your shortcomings, about, the reality of life. Like it's not easy. I'm not perfect all the time. I'm definitely a person, right? I get stressed out also, things like that. But it definitely opened my eyes to exactly what you said, which is people are inundated with information and they are so obsessed with these granular ideas that they heard on social media that the bigger picture stuff has just gone right over their head. So I remember the first time someone started talking to me about seed oils and how we can't have seed oils because they cause inflammation. And I was like, okay, I hear you 100%, but you did eat 3 Krispy Kreme donuts yesterday. So as much as I know you don't want to eat this whole grain bread because it does have seed oil in it, we're fighting the wrong fight. And so it really became like I didn't realize in the beginning how much of what I did was going to be basically a crusade against misinformation, or not even misinformation, very extracted information that is not presented in the correct context.
Yeah, it's this idea of majoring in the minors where it's like,
Yes.
hey, if I do my 10-minute or my 3-minute cold plunge, is that going to help? Or if I do this, it's like, why don't we try sleeping for 8 hours first
Yeah.
before we like
Yeah.
worry about that? Let's worry about whole unprocessed foods before we think about these minute supplements and different things that you can be taking. And I think people are searching for like the magic pill, like, ooh, this is the one. This is the thing that's going to
Yes.
unlock it all for me. And the more we travel down that path, the less enthused and happy we get, because it always seems to just come back to the boring, monotonous, mundane
Yep.
decisions. And people don't like that. And I think they
Yeah.
want something that feels like it's new and it's flashy, or it's like the best groundbreaking science, but that's just not how it works.
No, no. And it's really funny because multiple times a day, people will come to me with, you know, should I do X, Y, and Z? Should I do zone 2 cardio? Well, is that the fat burning zone? Should I do that? And I'm like, don't you think that if it were that simple, I would be out of a job? Like, don't you think if it were that easy, everyone would just be in great shape and like we'd all just be happy and hot? Like, I understand how much people want to have that quick fix, but it truly is the mundane. It's I say this all the time. People, the peak of my year is Thanksgiving. When Thanksgiving comes around, it is like the reckoning for me. And so everybody is freaking out about, oh my God, Thanksgiving, there's going to be so much turkey and pie, and my grandma makes this thing, and how am I going to say no? And I'm going to get so fat, I'm going to eat all that. And I'm like, if every other day of the year, if every other boring day of the year, you just ate according to, your blueprint, what you need, you ate whole, unprocessed foods for the most part. You drank enough water, you got enough sleep, you moved your body for about an hour or so. You could have whatever you wanted on Thanksgiving and it wouldn't make a difference. Thanksgiving is not the problem. The problem is, Tuesday, July 17th, when got a little stressed out and decided to take a walk to carve out. Like, that's the problem, right? And I think people really do get caught up in like that. Well, if I take this supplement, and it's like, back it up. When was the last time you ate a vegetable?
And I think
Yeah.
sometimes that's the beauty of coaching, is you get the opportunity to hold the mirror in front of them and also to educate and walk the path with them, because sometimes it does require education of like, hey, yeah, seed oils, they might, and they probably do cause inflammation. So we can look at the different foods you're eating to limit some of that intake. And let's also just look at what are the ways that we can get in the amount of nutrients that are going to support your energy, support your goals that you have, and make sure that you feel good, are moving well, and seeing progress. So I think there's this opportunity where I know you mentioned this idea of like sometimes you got to talk people off the cliff if they just need somebody to tell them it's going to be okay, or here's the best way forward. And they do that when they find the trust in somebody. And when they start to trust you and open up about some of their shortcomings or the things that are challenging, that's that great opportunity to leverage some compassion and empathy, and then hold the mirror up and be like, hey, this is what it is. You get to make the decision on whether you want to do this or not. I want to help you, but at the end of the day, it really does come down to you. And I want to give you and empower you with enough information and enough opportunities to make better decisions than not. And I feel like that's kind of what it seems like it comes down to when it comes to that coaching and how you work with folks.
Yeah. And that's the thing, right? Like I really pride myself on being very honest with people. Because I think there's also sort of, again, like the pendulum will swing in the wrong direction, where there are people who, um, sorry, someone is calling me. There are
Mm,
people who always um, will understand, right, from a coaching perspective, that they can make a lot of money telling people good news about their bad habits. Like, I'm sure people, if I told everybody that they could eat whatever they wanted and it didn't matter, that I would make plenty of money. I'm sure I'd have people begging me to work with them. And I don't want to do that. Like, I feel very strongly that my integrity is not for sale in that capacity. And so when somebody asks me, for example, well, how do I fit alcohol into my nutrition plan? My answer is you can't. You could try. Like, I'm not here to tell you that you cannot drink. I am not the, abstinence police, right? Like, I don't care. It doesn't mean anything to me personally. I don't think you're a bad person, but there's really no way to fit that in here and make it all kind of work out in the end. Like, you're making a decision, and it is what it is. And I think, you know part of the job is being honest with people and holding them accountable, and it's uncomfortable, right? And it took me a long time to feel okay with that discomfort, where I know I've upset you and I know that this is not what you want to hear, but I feel very much like when a parent says, I am your parent, I'm not your friend. And that is very much the relationship that I carry. And that's not to say I don't have great friendships with the people that I coach, but it's all predicated on honesty. And I do not like to be a fixer, right? I'm not going to fix the problem for you, but I am going to walk you through how you can fix it yourself.
I love that process of like finding the balance between supportive, encouraging. We're built in this trust, but I also have to do what you're asking me to do, which is to have sometimes challenging or tough conversations, tough realizations, put that in front of you to let you decide. But here's where it is. And I think what's interesting too when it comes to nutrition coaching is that there's so many different ideas, books, philosophies on it. Having been in the space for a while now, is there sort of a philosophy that you either abide by or you found to be successful? I think CrossFit's got their definition of nutrition within their fitness within 100 words. You've got folks who love tracking macros, folks who don't. You've got all these different modalities. What have you found or either kind of subscribed to as a nutrition coach that works well with your clients?
I think the biggest sort of North Star for me and my coaching is that the only way people are going to be successful is if they like the plan that they're following. So for a long time, I felt very stubborn in my like, everyone should be doing CrossFit and everybody should eat this way and everybody should feel like this. And the best laid plans of mice and men, right? Because I started working with people and I was like, oh, you're not gonna do that, what I want you to do, right? Like, you're only gonna do the thing you want to do. And so if I wanted to be successful, if I wanted to help these people, I had to bend what I thought was right to accommodate them. And again, that doesn't mean selling my integrity, right? It like, some things are true and necessary, and sometimes it's like, if this person tells me that they're going to have pizza every Friday, I might just have to figure it out, because I'm not going to change them, right? And I'm going to let them know, I don't advise this, but okay, fine, right? Or someone who says to me, I only do Peloton. Okay, I'm not going to change you. I'm not going to change. And just because that's my view on the subject doesn't mean that it's correct. And so the only plan that is going to work is one that someone is willing to follow. And so I sort of became a little bit less rigid in how I prescribe things for people. And I also stopped expecting perfection. And I think there's a lot of kind of self-awareness involved in that, because I generally don't have a problem sticking to the rules of something. That is just me as a person. I'm not a big like I do the same thing every day. I'm very good about being where I said I'm going to be and doing what I said I'm going to do. And some people are not as adherent. Some people, and not everybody cares about health and fitness as much as I do, right? So some people are like, I know I said I was going to eat a salad last night, but I had a burger. And it doesn't, it's, they're just a different person. So I stopped expecting perfection and I started just working with the person and not the blueprint.
That perspective of meeting people where they're at and understanding that it's going to be a journey. It's going to be a process. It's not just something that'll happen overnight, because most likely if it was, then they probably would have figured it out and they wouldn't necessarily even need a coach based on information they could find online. So they're investing in someone who's going to walk it with them and figure out the goods and the bads and everything in between, because yeah, humans are incredibly complex. And the more you feel like we know what we're going to do, the less we feel like we know
Yeah.
what we're going to do. And so I can imagine from all the different experiences you've had of figuring out, how do I meet this person where they're at, know the information that I have is useful, but we have to find a way that it's going to apply to them. And I think that's regardless of fitness or anything else we do, of like, when you find something you like, keep going with that. And that's going to allow people to stick to those decisions, which I think is really, really helpful.
Yeah. And and that's not to say that if someone says to me, if someone comes to me crying because they absolutely hate their body or they hate the way they feel or they hate the way their clothes fit, and then in the same breath they're like, "Well, I'm not going to stop eating ice cream." It's like, well, then I have to be honest with them, right? Like I can't make both of those things work. At least not in the way that they would like for me to make them work. But, it is a it's a complex conversation, but it has to happen because I can't provide people with illusions, right? But that's when we come to a common solution where it's like, listen, you can have it once a week, it'll be a little treat, but enough of the everyday thing. And an older, less educated version of me would have said, no, you can't have that because I don't eat that, so you shouldn't eat that. We're not eating that. And now it's like, not everyone is me, right? Not everyone is, you can't coach the blueprint. You have to coach the person. So, we grow as well.
I 100% agree. The more you interact with folks, the more stories you hear, the more that you get an opportunity to share the information you're passionate about, you realize it applies so differently and uniquely to each person that you come across. And I think that's the
Yeah.
fun and the enjoyment of working with nutrition and lifestyle choices, is what that can look like. And so one of the things I've always asked all the guests that I'm always really curious about is, you've had a lot of experiences, a lot of awesome opportunities to apply things you've learned in different industries and learned a lot of things. When you think about this idea of values and um, the things that guide or influence how you interact with other people and make decisions or interact with the world, different principles, if you will, are there things that come to mind for you personally or individually that you're like, you know what, these are kind of some big things that I stand by, and I kind of hold things up against that. And if it makes sense, that's how I move forward or how I work with folks or my own life? Or what are some of the values or principles that you find that guide or influence how you interact with others?
I think the biggest value that I have in my life today, right, at 32 years old, is that I will not allow any one particular thing to have a chokehold on my life. So, I think that we get very dependent on other people and their opinions, or we get very dependent on substances, right? Like alcohol or drugs, or we get very dependent on food or social media. And I am not, totally like not victim to any of those things, right? Like, of course, but I will not allow those things to control my life in a way that makes me unhappy. So when I talk to people and they say things to me like, well, I can't live without X, Y, and Z, I feel very much like I want to help them understand that they can. And that doesn't mean they have to, but they can. Because that mentality of I am under the thumb of this thing or this person or whatever, is so damaging, and it is so limiting. So one of the things that I value the most is just like I don't know if I would call it freedom from those things or if I would call it like, independence. But I think it's really important because most of the people that I speak to are in one capacity or another, really gripped by something. And the solution to their problem is just letting that go. Um, and so I think that's really important. And additionally, I just think there's something really incredible about learning what you're capable of and understanding that you can do hard things, because any difficult thing that I've ever had to do in my life, I was able to do because I was certain that physically I can get through hard things. I can run 100 miles. I can, back squat a heavy weight. I can get through a Metcon where you feel like your heart is going to explode. And so I can have a tough conversation with somebody. Or I can, say no to this thing that maybe I want right now, but I know is not going to be good for me in the long run. And so when you are not gripped by something, when something doesn't have a grip on your life, you can do those hard things. And then you can, walk around with this knowledge that you are unstoppable. And I think that's what people need.
Yeah, I love the connection of understanding that doing hard physical things can give us the mental confidence to handle any situation that comes our way. And then having a very stoic philosophy around how we interact with external things in our lives and not allowing them to dictate what's going on in the inner world of dictating how you feel, how you think, or how you operate. And so I love that those two go together. Well, Gab, it's been awesome having you on and chatting, getting to know a little bit more about your story. So folks who are interested in connecting, I know you're very active out there on social media, as well as helping other folks find the nutrition that's going to help them to achieve their goals. So what are ways that people can connect with you if they're interested?
Yeah. Best way to connect with me is going to be on Instagram. I'm at gab.bolin. And I would love to hear from you, questions, stories. Would love to connect with some people in the greater culture world.
Woohoo. Well, I'm excited to continue learning from you and the team at CBG and figuring out ways we can collaborate and work together. It was awesome getting to know you and your story. Thanks so much for sharing. And I look forward to the next opportunity we have to connect.
Yeah, same here. Thank you so much, Brad. This was great.